The Sicilian defense happens when white plays e4 and black answers with c5. Now, the point of this opening is trying to stop the move d4 for white, because if you allow white to play both d4 and e4, let's say e6, then white controls the whole center, and, well, that is considered to be a little bit or slightly passive opening for black, because white immediately controls the whole center. But c5 is an attempt to stop this d4 move, at least make it much more difficult, because now if white plays d4, then we can capture it. It is stopping it just as e5 does, but the difference is huge, because you see after e4, e5, that is a symmetrical position, and so it's much more solid, much more calm, so to say. And after c5, you immediately create an imbalance in the position. That is why it makes it much more sharp, and then some crazy variations, some crazy positions happen on the board. And usually people who really love to attack, people who really like this madness on the board, prefer to play the Sicilian defense, because they want to outplay their opponent, because of course it's much more difficult to play this type of positions where there are so much going on the board. For example, when both opponents are going into the opposite castles, then of course both players are attacking it. For example, black is attacking here, trying to give a checkmate, whereas white is attacking here, trying to give a checkmate, and then anybody could win. And the question is, who is just going to be faster with their threats and deliver this checkmate. So, well, you learn a lot if you play the Sicilian defense, because the positions are so rich, so complex, and of course if you practice it, and with the time you start to understand it, and you learn incredibly a lot in the process, so in terms of your chess understanding. But I have also to warn you that if you start to play it, chances are it's going to be very difficult for you at the first place, because it would be so difficult for you to understand where you should put your pieces. But yeah, like I said, it's very useful. You're going to get a lot. So let me show you some of the main line here. So c5, now white has a choice between knight f3, which is the main move, which is called the open Sicilian. It's called opened because white is trying to still open up the center with the move d4. And there is also a closed Sicilian, which is knight to c3, and then white is rather playing d3 instead of d4 and trying to create some attack here on the hidden side without really opening up the center. Let's start with knight f3 because, well, that's the main line here, and the main response among the beginners is knight c6 here. It's also one of the main lines among masters too, but, well, there is also d6, which is incredibly popular too. Knight c6. Now the main move for white is d4, and of course, almost always whenever you see the move d4 in the Sicilian defense, black has to take it, because remember, it was the point of the move c5, of the whole opening, to make it more difficult for white to control the center. So we take here, and now you can notice that there are two pawns for black in the center, and there's two center lines, and there is only one pawn for white. But of course, white is more active, so that kind of compensates it, and also, of course, white is still having the initiative here in the center. Now, there are different lines. There is knight f6 here. The most popular choice among the beginners is e5, attacking this knight immediately. And now most of the beginners make here a mistake with white, or at least, let me say, an inaccuracy. Because instead of playing knight b5, which is the right move here, the best move objectively, they just take the knight on c6. That is changing the knight and making the life much simpler for black. And remember, you never want to make the life too simple for your opponent, because, well, now there is another pawn going towards the center. It's helping black to prepare this move d5 and just control the whole center. And also it makes the development much simpler. There are no weaknesses in black's camp. Because the main drawback of this move e5 is that now this d5 pawn is d5 square, is incredibly vulnerable. And oftentimes what happens is white goes with the knight to d5 and occupies the square, and, well, black has to live with it forever. But if white just takes, then there is a pawn suddenly on c6, which covers the square, and basically black has no problems at all. So the right move here is knight to b5, not only leaving this d5 square vulnerable for black, but also trying to use the fact that the d6 square is also weak. And at some point, this knight might just jump to d6 with a check. For example, if you play here a6, trying to push this knight back, it might jump to d6 with a check, and then you have to give up your bishop, which is, yeah, normally not that great. You want to have a pair of bishops instead of a knight and a bishop against two bishops, especially in the open position. So that is why black is playing d6, and then this pawn on d6 oftentimes is a huge weakness for black, but, well, the main dream of black is to play d5 one day, and they say if you manage to play d5 in the Sicilian defense and you survive it, then you have achieved your goal, then it should be good for you. Okay, so that's the move e5. Of course, there are multiple different lines here, but that is actually the direction it goes to. Except for, or apart from knight to c6, there is also d6, and then white is still playing d4. Those positions happen incredibly often nowadays, especially at the top level, because, like I said, if black finds themselves in a situation when they absolutely must win the game, then they usually play this move c5 because it's sharper. It's of course more risky as well, because you give your opponent the initiative and then you want to outplay him thanks to hopefully your chess understanding, better chess understanding. So for example, here after knight f6, knight c3 and a6. a6 is a very useful move in the Sicilian defense because it controls this b5 square, and afterwards those knights and also the bishop can go there, which helps if you want to develop your queen, for example, to make sure that nobody is going to attack you. And so after this a6, what happens is this so-called Schneider's variation, incredibly popular because, well, black has so many different opportunities. Now, what often happens is that white goes into the queen side with the castles, whereas black goes into the king side. Yeah, here e6, white immediately can play f4, trying to start the attack as fast as possible. And then let's say bishop e7, queen goes to f3, queen to c7, trying to put the queen as active as possible along the c file, and white goes long castles, knight to b7, g4, and b5. And now the question is, like I said, who's going to be the fastest one to deliver a checkmate, to create some incredibly dangerous threats for the opponent? That is going to be the player who's going to win the game. And of course, the chances of the game to end in a draw are significantly lower here than in some symmetrical openings like e4, e5, or d4, d5. And so those are the open Sicilian. If we are talking about closed Sicilian, it's when white plays knight c3, and then instead of playing d4 and opening up the position, they rather play d3. Like, for example, you could start with g3, and then bishop goes to g2. And then instead of playing d3, well, here it's not possible anymore because black is covering the square so many times. What happens is white plays d3 and then f4. And of course, the idea is to attack on the king side, whereas black is trying to create some counterplay on the queen side and in the center. So this d4 square is perfect for this knight to go. And of course, we can bring some more pawns on the queen side to make this bishop even stronger. So for example, e6, knight f3, both sides are developing the pieces, castles, castles, and black is saying, well, I'm not really afraid. I know that you're gonna attack me here, but I'm gonna still castle. And yeah, I'm gonna hope that I have enough defenders here, because you see this f5 square is protected 4 times. And yeah, black will start to create some attack over here. Yeah, so that is basically the closed Sicilian with knight c3. Now, white can also play c3 here with a pawn, saying, well, you're stopping my d4 pawn, so I'm going to prepare it first, and then I'm going to still play d4 and try to control the whole center. So if you play something like knight c6, you are immediately allowing white to play d4 and basically control everything in the center. So what often happens is that black plays knight f6, immediately creating some threat, attacking this pawn. Remember that in chess, it's very important to be as active as you can. It's very important to create some problems for your opponent. And so, for example, here, knight c6, I mean, both moves are developing the knight. But knight c6 doesn't create any problems for black, and he can just continue his plan like he wanted. But knight f6, it's not that simple to play d5 anymore, d4, sorry, because you can just take this pawn, and now it's a healthy extra pawn for black without any compensation. So white can't just ignore this threat, and so you always want to try to make your opponent's life more complicated. That is the way to succeed in chess. And then, so white plays e5, knight goes to d5, and now d4 is possible, and white controls the whole center, but once again, black is trying to attack it with the move d6, trying to put some pressure, and eventually there might be just one pawn left for white in the center, which is going to be a target, of course, but black should be careful here, because remember that you always risk when you make a lot of moves with the same piece in the opening. I always advise you to make just one move with one piece, and that is how you develop all of your pieces as fast as possible, and also try to choose the most active squares for it. Okay, so that is about the move c3. Of course, black can play d5 here immediately, trying to grab some more space in the center, but the drawback is, of course, that queen has to be developed early on, which is usually not that advisable, and, well, what's going to happen is at some point this queen is going to be attacked somehow. But, well, completely playable for black as well. And another opportunity for white here is to say, well, you're stopping my d4 move, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm not afraid of it. I'm going to play d4. You can take it. And by the way, whenever white plays d4 in the Sicilian Defense, black basically must take, because otherwise you're allowing white to just go forward with a pawn, and then, yeah, the center would be just too strong for white, and it would be too difficult for black to develop the pieces. So black takes, but now queen takes d4 wouldn't be so great for white, because once again, queen in the center, not a good sign. Now black could develop a piece with a tempo and win some time, which is always great. That is why white plays here c3, sacrificing the pawn, so it's called the Mora gambit, and means Mora gambit. And here knight takes c3, and white is immediately trying to be very active, just saying, okay, you're a pawn up, but look at your position, nothing is developed, whereas I have already developed a knight and the pawn is in the center, controlling some squares. And so, yeah, white is trying to immediately be very aggressive, create some threats, and have this initiative. Something else I wanted to mention here, after knight f3, of course, there is a very sharp line for black known as the dragon variation. To do that, well, you either start with knight c6 or you immediately play the move g6, but that's the key of the dragon, to develop your bishop to g7, and basically as early as possible, because the bishop is very great here, and it gets even sharper because it creates even more imbalance in the position here after d4, takes, bishop to g7. Black is putting a lot of pressure on white's position. For example, knight c6 here is immediately attacking this knight, so black has to defend it. Then white is developing the pieces as well. And so what happens is, once again, a typical situation where white is going with the castles, with the long castles, and then starts to attack here with g4, h4, h5, whereas black is trying to create some pressure on the queen side. And so the resulting position is incredibly sharp, and, well, oftentimes the one who is going to be the fastest with those breakthroughs on the sides is going to be the winner. And of course, the probability of a draw is significantly lower here than in some solid openings like in the e4, e5 or d4, d5. So basically, the black's plan is to fight for the center from the very beginning, with a Sicilian defense from the very first move when you play c5 here, and then trying to create some imbalance in the position, trying to develop the pieces as active as possible, and then start some attack. And normally the attack is on the queen side of the board, or maybe also in the center. And whereas white is trying to create some attack on the king side normally and trying to give a checkmate as fast as possible. And that is why this opening is so popular, because it gives chances to both sides to attack and, well, to show the best qualities that they have in chess. I hope you have got an understanding of what the Sicilian defense is, why it's so popular nowadays, and I hope you are gonna try it one day and enjoy this beautiful opening. Let me know in the comments whether you like this type of videos when I tell you about some main ideas of a certain opening, whether you would like me to go deeper into the variations, or maybe you have a specific opening which you would like me to cover. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next videos.